You know the type, employees who don't actually violate policy, but they're coasting. They show up, they just do enough. They're not insubordinate, but they're also not contributing. What can you do? Stay tuned. Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. We are going to talk about quiet quitting, which is something we've talked about before. But we have a little bit of a different spin today because what I'm hearing a lot of our clients and our friends say is, but Jen, what am I going to do? They do just enough to get by. They're not really violating policy. They're just kind of lazy and kind of not doing what they're supposed to be doing. What can I do? Well, the truth is, there are a lot of things you can do to address these types of performance issues, because that's what it is, right? If somebody's quietly quitting, that's a performance issue. They're not doing what you hired them to do. They're not exercising the good judgment and the knowledge and using their skills the way they should be to get the job done, right? They're essentially stealing from you, if I could be blunt, because you're paying them and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So what can you do? All right. So first of all, step number one is you've got to set your expectations. And I am really surprised at how few of us do this, including me, okay? So we hire people in our law firm. They're great. They're awesome. They're smart. They want to work here. We love them. And we have like sort of pseudo job descriptions that we use when we're advertising for a job or something like that. But honestly, it hasn't been until very recently that we've figured out that we have to have a manual. We have to tell people exactly what you need to be doing. Because here's the deal. Number one, they don't have ESP. So they're not going to know what you want unless you tell them. Number two, how can you hold somebody accountable if you haven't told them what you expect? Now, I know what you're thinking. Should you really have to tell somebody that they need to be butt in chair at 8:30 if their start time is 8:30? No, you shouldn't. But before I started doing that, I would have people come in at exactly 8:30 with their hair wet, and they would say, I got to go to the bathroom to get my hair done, and then I want to run to Starbucks and get a coffee, which in our office is not just around the corner. And then they get started around 9:15. I don't mean to be a pill, but I paid you starting at 8:30. I need you here. It's not just a matter of having you clock in. The phone is ringing off the hook by 8:30. I need you here to help us get our work done, okay? So you got to set expectations, and I realize that. I don't love confrontation or conflict, and I want to be a nice person. I want to be a good leader, and I don't want people to think I'm micromanaging them or imposing on them. So what I did for a long time was just not give people a lot of feedback. I would just figure that they knew what they were supposed to do and they would do it. But that's not fair. If you want to get the best out of someone, you have to tell them what you want and what you need. Now, once you do that, if they are still regularly not getting it done, that's a corrective action situation, right? You've got to counsel them. You've got to let them know, hey, it ain't working. But you don't need to do that until you've set the stage, you've set the expectation. So step number one is you've got to set the expectation. All right. Step number two, you have to reserve some discretion in terms of how you're going to deal with a failure to meet those expectations. Here's what I mean. I read a lot of employee handbooks where you have a very detailed policy about corrective action. The first infraction of policy, you get a verbal warning. The second infraction of policy, you get a written warning. The third infraction of policy, you get a final written warning. And the fourth time, we fire you. Okay, that's really fine, except what happens if somebody just hauls off and hits somebody at work? So they violated your workplace violence prevention policy. What are you going to say? Well, I'm only going to give you a verbal warning because in our policy, it says that we first give a verbal, then we give a written, then we give a final, then we terminate you. Of course not. You're not going to do that. So don't write your policies that way. You have to give yourself discretion to deal with people. All right. And each situation is individual. So when you have a quiet quitter who's just barely getting it done, but they're doing enough, they're not hitting anybody, They're not sexually harassing anybody. They're not being evil in the workplace. They're just not doing it. They're barely getting the work done. They're showing no initiative. Okay? You need to hold them accountable, because here's what happens, and I know it from personal experience. You let them get away with that for 3 or 4 years, and now that becomes the expectation. And now you want to up the ante. It's like you're picking on them. And now your road is going to be a lot tougher in terms of how you're going to deal with that situation. So when you have policies and procedures and you're dealing with these things, you've got to give yourself the discretion to deal with them right away. All right, step number 3, you actually have to deal with it. What's the Nike trademark? Just do it. You actually have to do it. You have to hold them accountable. Sometimes I find myself just thinking to myself, well, I wish they'd do that different, or I wish that would be done differently, or this person isn't really doing what they should be doing. But I don't take any action. I'm just letting it continue. That's not good. That's bad management. That's bad leadership. Not okay. And you know who it's really unfair to? The people who are busting their chops. The people who come to work almost every day with a smile on their face. They're getting it done. And this quiet quitter is like, yeah, I dare you. Because I'm getting my things done as slowly as I possibly can, with some errors, but not enough errors for you to really get on me. It's unfair to those people who are working hard. Okay, so the third thing you have to do is you have to actually be willing to hold people accountable. You have to take those policies and those procedures and those expectations that you've communicated, and you have to hold people accountable to them. You have to make sure they understand exactly what you expect, and then you have to take action if they don't meet your expectations. Now, the action may just be, hey, you didn't do what I thought you were going to do. Let's talk about why. And you find out there was a misunderstanding. Great. When I say you have to take action, I don't mean you have to take negative action. The first thing you're going to do is talk to the person about, why is this happening? You seem less enthusiastic about your job. You're not taking the initiative the way you used to take initiative. You don't seem as committed to the organization. Let's talk about that. Somebody may have the nerve to tell you, well, it's not written in my job description that I have to be enthusiastic. It's not written in my job description that I have to take initiative. Maybe it isn't, but that's what we expect. Those are the other duties as assigned, or the other duties as required that you should put in every job description at the end of the job description, right? So you want to make sure that you're communicating to them, hey, this is what I need you to be doing, and you're not getting it done. Now, whatever action you take, verbal warning, discussion, expectations memo, whatever it is, you've got to create documentation. The documentation must be dated. It must be clear who wrote the documentation. If you're sending an email to yourself, that's fine. If you have a notebook that you write in, that's fine. But either way, you've got to have documentation of what's going on. And that's critically important to back up the decisions and the actions that you're taking in step 3. So step 4 is you always document everything that's going on. All right, step 5, you have to follow through. So if you tell this employee, I need you to change X, and I need to see immediate and sustained improvement in X, which is my favorite phrase, immediate and sustained improvement. I need to see that. If I don't see that, we're going to have a tougher conversation. Then when you don't see it, when the quiet quitter keeps quietly quitting, you have to call them out. Don't let it go. And I am so guilty of this, because I get busy and I sit in my office and I take all these conference calls and I do all these things that I do. And then sometimes I realize, oh my gosh, a month has gone by since I should have talked to such and such person about X issue. You have to be on top of it. If you are too busy to effectively manage, then you need to get some things off your plate. Because if your job is to manage, to supervise, to be a leader, and you're not doing that, you're not holding people accountable, and you're not preparing documentation to show that you've done so, then you're not doing your job. So while you are upset at somebody else not doing their job, you're not doing your job. So you have to be willing to take that extra step and hold the person accountable. You've got to follow through. That's the 5th step. Okay, now, one of the things that really confuses people about quiet quitting or the soft quit is that the person isn't doing enough to flunk, right? They're kind of getting a C- or a D+. And you're thinking, gosh, I would like them to do better. I would like it if they did A or B or C or D, but at least they're doing F and G and E. So I don't know, maybe it's the best I'm going to get. Do not sell yourself short and do not sell your team short. It's not okay. And in fact, as I'm telling you this right now, I am so clear about something I need to do because it's really not okay to sell your team short, to not hold the people accountable who should be held accountable. I want you to remember that. All right. So you've got your 5 steps. Understand that you're not going to change people's personalities. You may have somebody who's very ebullient, who's very outspoken, who's very engaging. You may have someone who's quiet. Quiet people are fantastic as long as they're not quietly quitting, right? That's the problem. Quiet quitting. Okay. Now, another aspect of this that I want to talk to you about that I think is very important is when you tell someone they're going to be held accountable and then you hold them accountable, they think that's retaliation, right? They think they're being punished. Wow, you told me that I needed to do these things and I didn't do them and now you're holding me accountable. That's unfair. That must be retaliation. That is not retaliation. That is called management. That is called leadership. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. So I know people throw around these terms: hostile work environment, harassment, retaliation, discrimination. If what you're doing is holding somebody accountable to clear expectations you already set for them, that is not retaliation. That is not a hostile work environment. That is not abusive conduct. That is not bullying. That is management. That is getting your money's worth for what you hired the person to do. That is what we're talking about here. So when we look at quiet quitting, the reason it's still happening is because we're not giving it enough attention. It started during COVID when people started working at home. Some people are very good at working at home and some people are not. The people who are not so great, who find themselves getting distracted, realized they could get away with a lot, right? And now we're way past that critical part of COVID, that horrifying year and a half that we had. And they still want to have the same environment. They still want to work at home, right? What are you seeing? More and more people ask for accommodation requests where they want to work at home. Here in Sacramento, we have a lot of state employees. We have a lot of state employees throughout the state, right, who work for the state of California. They have been ordered back to work 4 days a week by the governor effective July 1 in just a couple of days. The number of reasonable accommodation requests demanding fully remote work have skyrocketed. And remember, accommodations are either for religious reasons or medical reasons. You have to hold people accountable. If they don't meet the requirements to work at home, if the job isn't a job that should be worked at home, if they can't perform the essential functions working at home, if they're in a situation where you just don't want them working at home, you want your team in the office, you're allowed to do that. That's okay. We've created this impression that there's an entitlement to work at home. There's an entitlement to quietly quit. There is not. And by the way, I'm not analogizing quietly quitting with working at home. We have 2 of our lawyers who work at home 100% of the time, right? I basically never see them except on Zoom. And they're great. They get everything done. There's no problem. Okay, so I'm not equating those 2 things. But what I am saying is whether somebody's trying to get out of being in the office because they're quietly quitting or for another reason, you have the right to require them to be there. And most importantly, you have the right to hold employees accountable to what you hired them for. Can you move their cheese? Can you change what the requirements are? You bet. Can soft skills be part of it? Working collaboratively, being respectful, being appropriate, taking initiative? You bet. So take a little inventory of your team this week. Think about if you have any quiet quitters. Sit down and call them on it. Say, hey, look, it kind of seems like you're quietly quitting. If you want to go, you can go. But if you're going to stay, we're going to have some new expectations starting immediately. I know it's not a lot of fun to go through this kind of conversation, but I'm telling you folks, it will make a world of difference in your organization. Don't shy away from it. Thanks so much for joining me today, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Talk to you next time. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others. Post about it on social media and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.